Welcome to the Revenue Builders Podcast, a weekly show featuring B2B sales leaders and executives. Hosted by five-time CRO John McMahon and Force Management co-founder John Kaplan, the show goes behind the scenes with the people who have been there, done that, and seen the results. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help us reach more people. Revenue Builders is brought to you by Force Management. We help companies improve sales performance, executing the growth strategy at the point of sale. Find us at forcemanagement.com. Enjoy today's episode.
So Tony, we're just coming off a Super Bowl, college football playoffs, and in the preparation for this, we're talking about the corporate athlete that we're going to dig into a little bit, and so we're really ecstatic to have you with us. Before we get started a little bit, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about the kind of the unique history that you and I have?
Yeah, going back to the timeline of First Data, which was sort of the Xerox and the Kodak of the early 2000s. We knew that many things were broken, including the sales process. And we hired Force Management to help us put in place, a new way of going to market. And, John was our partner in our selection there. And, that sort of led us, him and I, to building a relationship and getting to know each other. And we sort of stumble on the fact that, we learned that we played against each other on the gridiron in Division I college football in what would it have been, John? 1984, 1983.
Yeah, and, a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. I played for Ohio U. John played the Bowling Green, and we know so many people that were on that field, that day, and we just stumbled on that, which I thought was tremendous. Now, I will say it wasn't as good of a memory for me as it was for you, right, John? Because I think you guys won.
Well, I wish I had a lot to do with it, but we had a pretty good team back then, buddy. We had a pretty good team.
No, I have to defend my Bobcats. They won the MAC championship this year, and I have to get that in. But you're right. I think you guys got the best of us that day.
It just proves small world. I had no idea. You had no idea. And I can't remember. I think we asked each other where we went to school or whatever. And that was amazing. So, on that theme, transferable lessons, you and I have talked about this a lot. Transferable lessons from, like athletics to business. What are some of people ask me all the time? I'm sure they ask you all the time. What are some of those things that are transferable?
Yeah, sometimes we don't equate the two, but in reality, almost everything we learned, in athletics or team sport, ends up being applicable in the corporate world. In fact, I've been doing a lot of executive coaching. I've been kind of assigned in my new job to the top, 15 or 20 of our future stars, and working with each of them, I see the effect of, very, very large jobs, very complex. A person might have $1 or $2 billion in revenue. A person might be managing a operations team of 20, 30,000. These are big, stressful, complex jobs. So, you think about one of the most transferable items is, sort of the mindset of a leader, sort of the mental toughness. But I'm also finding, the real physical aspect, and you wouldn't normally associate, what we learned in athletics with physical. But I would say that almost without question, everyone I've been coaching, we sort of go through all the basics. Do you have a healthy diet? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you having regular exercise? Are you managing stress? Because to be your best and to deliver your best, you have to, feel and be in top shape. And almost without exception, every one of the leaders, and these are the best and the brightest, they all have something that they could do better in this area. So that, sort of got me on this concept of, you need to be a corporate athlete if you're going to succeed in these big, tough jobs. And, that's something that I've incorporated sort of in my executive coaching practice. And it's something that, John, I know you and I have always believed in, that, if we're going to be our best for our families and for our teams, we've got to take care of ourselves. And, that means I tell them, if you're not giving yourself 1 or 2 hours a day, you're sort of cheating yourself, right? You got 24 hours in the day. You got to find the time for 1 or 2 for yourself.
Johnny, you have had the same viewpoint. You and I have talked about this for years, and all the executives and teams and boards that you've been on, the same takeaway on the physical. What are your what do you see out there? Do you see similar things? And is it
you just have to, it's really difficult to deal with the stress and some of the decisions that you have to make as a leader. Sometimes as a leader, you could feel like a man on an island, and because the decision gets plopped on your desk. And what I found is that the leaders that take care of them, like, you can't take care of your team if you can't take care of yourself. When you don't take care of yourself, you lose perspective. And the one thing that people are counting on you as a leader is to have proper perspective over the decisions you're making, which are going to have an effect on your entire team. So, I've seen many times where leaders that I know are starting to lose themselves, and I'll have a conversation with them and say, hey, you're starting to lose yourself. I can see it. You're gaining a little extra weight. You're getting stressed out. You're getting snappy with your responses to people. I think it's time that you start to take better care of yourself, because, the people are holding you accountable for making the right decisions and having the proper perspective. And the only way to do that is to take care of yourself. And I always say to people, you don't take care of yourself, no one else is going to help you. So it's you.
I love that. And, it's not like, my experience is it's not a one-time thing, meaning you're not going to fall, or you're not going to get out of balance one time in your career. You're going to get out of balance many times in your career. And I think the most successful people that I've ever met are the ones that know themselves really, really well. And they know when they get out of balance, or they're fortunate enough to work with great leaders who know them well. And it's just kind of a pattern recognition to say, okay, this is happening because all the ducks aren't in a row, and I got to take some time. I got to incorporate some time. But Tony, that's normally the biggest problem. It's not a comprehension thing. It's not, I don't know how to do it. Normally it's the time aspect where people are just like, I would say that what I've learned, the most common conversation I've had with leaders in the last 20 years is the statement begins with, if I just had more time, if I just had 5 more minutes. How do you counsel people with that?
Yeah, a good friend of mine, Michelle Rosen, I'll give her a shout out for a new book she wrote called The 6% Club. And it's really timely because, we all know that people set New Year's resolutions at the end of the year. And, most likely it has something to do with maybe going to the gym. And we go to the gym in January and we find the parking lot's full, right? And then we roll up in March and, you could park anywhere. And,
to March, bro. If you make it to March.
Right. And the premise of her book is that, 94% of the people fail when they set a goal because they really don't put the rigor and they don't put, the discipline around it that it requires. And, one of my favorite movies now, I'll give you guys a scoop on a cool movie, 14 Peaks, which is about, an amazing guy who decides to, in 7 months, scale 14 of the largest mountains. Sort of, sheds a whole new light on goal setting. First of all, anybody who comes in our office and says they want to do something in 6 months, we automatically should cut it in half because, people are conditioned to sort of always say 6 months. And, my view was if this guy could scale 14 mountains in 7 months, which the only other human had done in 7 years, we can get a lot done. But it takes, the discipline, it takes, the planning. And I think that's the biggest thing. You said it. People don't actually deliberately plan their 24 hours. And, you have to plan it down to the minute, but definitely planning it down to the hour and finding where, you're going to get your hour, right, is incredibly important. And I think that's the key is, okay, if I'm going to go to gym, I got to get a membership. I got to get signed up. I got to know what time I'm going to get up because, if I still want to get to work at a certain time, I might have to, go to bed earlier and I might have to get up earlier. I might have to have my gym bag ready. I might know what I need to do when I get to the gym. So I think that's the whole point of, becoming part of the 6% club. Those people who can achieve these goals and objectives is being able to be deliberate and planful. And if you do so, hey, you might not scale 14 peaks in 7 months, but you can get a lot done, a lot more in a 24-hour period than we sometimes give ourselves credit for.
Two other things that I think you take from teams, if we go back to team sports, Cap, is one is when you're the leader, you have to know what role you really play on the team and when to jump in and when not to jump in. And the second part is just like a team sport or you guys playing football, you realized when you had to run a new play that was going to take a lot of time to make sure that everybody drill after drill after drill after drill until everybody got it right. And then the team operated as a team, not just a bunch of individuals on the field. And I think that's really two real big takeaways from team sports is to understand that.
I think you're right. The story about starting something and not finishing it comes from the not creating habits around it. And so there's all kinds of data out there that says if you do something for 21 days, it's amazing. If you do something for 21 days, the probability of success is just skyrockets. And in the US, they actually have something here that I just started to hear about. It's called National Quitting Day. And it's on the gyms. And it's actually, they have a date. It's the third Friday of January is the National Quitting Day, where
it's only 3 weeks into the year.
It is. They have it down for data. It's called National Quitting Day. And there's all kinds of algorithms and things I've seen on social media to try to help people over the hump that says, hey, National Quitting Day is coming, and think about it. 3 weeks in, it's 21 days. It's pretty close. It's pretty close to being true. Hey, Tony, I read a book when I was younger that I thought was spectacular. It's an oldie but a goodie. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Mm-hmm. And my favorite memory from that book is the Big Rock Story. And if you guys remember, the Big Rock Story is he gets a woman up, and you can find it. Stephen Covey, Google Stephen Covey, Big Rock Story, and there'll be a wonderful video. And he gets this up and coming leader up, this woman, and he says, hey, let's try to fit all this stuff into this clear, like pretzel bucket or whatever.
Big jar. It's a big glass jar.
Yeah, big glass jar.
There's a professor that does it online with golf balls too. So.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is they put all this stuff into the jar, and then Covey starts asking her about what he calls the big rocks. He's like, okay, how you don't have any time to exercise. And so he gave her a bigger rock, and she's trying to stick it in there. And he goes well, what about your kids? Family time. And that's another big rock. And so the moral of the story was so profound. He dumps everything out and he says, imagine what would happen if we put the big rocks in first. And so he puts the big rocks in first, and then everything else goes on top of it. And he says, is it full? And the one you're talking about, Johnny, the audience says, yes, it's full. And he goes, so he pours in sand. And then afterwards he says, is it full? And they're like, no, it's not full, because they get it. And then he pours in water. And basically the theory some of the students said, no matter how busy you are, you can always get more. And that wasn't the story. The story was, what happens if you didn't put the big rocks in first? So do you find yourself talking to people about how to prioritize from a big rocks perspective?
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. I mean, during the pandemic, I didn't put the big rocks in first, because what happened was, right, the gyms were closed and we were all working from home, and the 8-hour day become a 10-hour day, became a 12-hour day. Before you knew it, it became a 14-hour day because everybody knew you were at home, you're at your desk. Yeah, of course I could call. So your day started to go from 7 in the morning till 8 or 9 at night. You started to immediately lose your balance. You weren't putting your rocks in, and man, you kind of come out of that. And I know myself personally, for the first time in my life, you feel the effects of burnout. Here's like, I've done, just this one thing singularly for now too long, sitting at a desk all day long, not good for you, not good for any of us. So I think it's all right. We got to find a way to put ourselves first, put our families first. And that will make you better at what you do. You're not detracting from the time at work. You're not detracting from what you're going to deliver. In fact, you're going to deliver it better, right, John? I mean, you and I talked. A body full of cortisol or a body full of, endorphins from whether it's yoga in the morning or meditation or taking a walk, you feel better, right? You're ready to go. You're ready to be your best. And I think, this concept of corporate athlete, it might not be anything new, but, I am trying to, make sure that people do sort of look at the discipline of, to your point, John, filling up the jar first.
Yeah. And Johnny, you and I talk a lot about like knowing yourself really, really, like I think again, the best leaders I've ever met are the ones that are self-aware. And I'll tell you just a little transparency for me. These things sneak up on me. Like it's not like a big event that happens. It's like there's stuff that begins to happen for me. When I'm out of balance, I know. And so do all my family members. So do my friends. Johnny and I talk about this. For me, I get snappy. Like I get out of character, not jovial guy. Like I start getting a little snappy. And that is a definite sign. And if I'm not with myself every day, if I'm not like, hey, how you doing? If I'm not checking in with myself, that stuff can start to build, and to where I get, for me, I get into some pretty big problems. So again, it's normally not a surprise. It's coming. And there's probably a lot of people out there that are listening. They're like, they know when winter's coming, like from the Game of Thrones, winter's coming.
But a lot of times when they do that, when I've seen them completely lose themselves, I call it Charlie Sheen syndrome. So Charlie Sheen, in the past, every couple of years, if you've been following the guy, he goes on this binge of drinking and drugs. And then he comes out while he's still on drugs and drinking and telling everybody why he's right and everybody else is wrong. And that's what I've seen when leaders really lose themselves.
Good one.
Through burnout, they get into Charlie Sheen syndrome, where it doesn't matter what you say, they're right and everybody else is wrong. And I thought, wow, you've really, completely lost yourself.
That's a really good one. So I guess, Tony, how do you help people find their because you're dealing with executives, you're dealing with up and comers, it's probably, people aren't typically open with this kind of stuff, right? So how do you find these things out?
Yeah, that's the part of executive coaching that we learn, building trust is crucial, to being able to have these honest conversations with people. And, I'll usually, introduce the topic, and, we'll start sometimes even with just, hey, when's the last time you had a full physical? And I'll use myself. I said, hey, I had this physical. I had not been a guy that would regularly go to the doctor. I found out that, I needed to do a little bit more here and there. And then, people tell me, hey, I haven't had a physical in, X years. And I'll be kind of on them. I'm like, look, I love the people that I work with, and I want them to do well. And to do well, you got to promise me you're going to go to the doctor. and start there, and I think just getting, your blood pressure, just getting, your vitals, can go a long way for people to take the first step. So I like to, get them to the professional as the first step, and then sort of work from there. But I do think they all come to the realization pretty quickly that yes, to your point, John, either I'm out of balance or yeah, you're right, I'm probably not, in the best, physical and mental. I'm probably not dealing with stress to the extent that, I could, and be more proactive around it. Then we sort of talk about, what they might want to think about there. And, we talk about stress a lot because I think in the corporate world, that's probably where it manifests itself. And, I believe that stress can be a great catalyst of getting things done, but it's when stress turns into distress, that sort of that endorphin rush goes to sort of a cortisol rush, and you start going downhill from there. So knowing when, to your point, John, when stress is turning into distress, is something that people need to be aware of.
I like that. I think for me, I've always said that the difference between stress and pressure is preparedness. It's preparedness. And people, that's where people get in trouble, I think, is that when they're not prepared, they get stressed. Pressure is like one of those heavy blankets. Like it's like, it feels good. It's like an old friend. It kind of lays on you a little bit. But stress, I find, comes from preparedness, and preparedness comes from the time pressure of, when you cut those corners on being prepared in sales and executive meetings and communication, whatever it is. I find that it's the act of being prepared.
But it goes back to your big rocks, and as a leader, understanding what your priorities are. Because in big corporations, what I found when I was acquired by big corporations is there's a lot of bureaucracy. So there's a lot of people that are trying to look busy. So what they do is they push a lot of stuff onto your desk, and they're trying to take their priorities and make them your priorities. And you have to understand, what are my priorities? And am I taking care of my priorities for my team? Am I taking care of those things first? And then maybe I can get to some other people and help them out with their priorities. And if you don't have those priorities, you can really be really busy all day. But when you go home, if you really ask yourself, what did you accomplish today? Even though you were super busy, maybe you didn't accomplish anything. So what I found is I always had to ask myself, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And what effect is that going to have on my team? And if I find that I'm doing something that doesn't really have a powerful effect on my team, it's not really accomplishing anything, well, then I'm just doing busy work.
How do you come up with the rhythm around that, guys? Like, I love what you're saying, Johnny, is that you got to establish your priorities. You also are a teammate. You also are subordinate. You have corporate priorities. You have, talk to us about the nuances, both you guys, on how do you establish those priorities based upon what's coming at you? I mean, you can't. Are you saying you tell your boss, no, I can't do that because it's not my priority? How do you do it?
Sometimes you may have to do that. I've had to do that. I've had to tell the CEO that's not a priority for me. Other people would complain to the CEO about me that I'm not responding in time. And I'd ask the CEO, why do you think that is important for me? And if you can't give me a good answer, and I don't think it's important, then obviously it's not important. I can get to it, but I'm not getting to it right away. I'm not getting to it in their time frame. Getting to it in my time frame. So, yeah, you need to. It's really hard because, as Tony said, so much is coming at you. You have to decide what's important. Otherwise, you're going to be really busy, but you're not going to accomplish anything. You're not going to be a great leader.
It's such a great topic, Tony. You must see this a lot in the multi-billion-dollar environments that you've been in for the last several years. How do you, as a leader that's not the CEO, let's say, that's not, casting strategy and things downward, how do you establish your priorities and get that rhythm upstream that says, these are what the priorities are, and this is what I'm kind of go with. Because it's not like Johnny, like you're saying, it's not a personal thing. You're not doing this on your own. You're communicating those priorities out, and you're getting good communication around those that says, hey, this is what we agreed were the priorities that we were going to work on. And if not, it turns into what I call rock management. You're going to get, somebody's giving you a new rock to go out in the field and address. So Tony, what advice do you have for up and coming leaders, how to establish your priorities when you got everything coming at you?
Yeah, I think every leader should frequently, maybe it's, every 3 months, maybe it's every 6 months, but sort of evaluate, everything that's on their desk and, sort of, really do a critical view of, hey, is this really adding value? Or is just activity that, is taking up time and space? And I think that, looking at, our activity critically from, is it generating value for our customers? Is it generating value, because it's part of a team that's trying to get something done? Is it generating value for our shareholders? I think coming back to those, fundamental truths does let us sort out, all those things that are on our desk and sort of put aside, those things that they might be nice, but they're not critical to the mission of getting done what we need to get done. And in fact, they actually may be detracting from it. So I do think, it's like, going into your closet, every once in a while, or you got to go in and say, look, I haven't worn, half of the closet in 2 years. It's time to clear that out.
Great analogy.
What I need to do, right?
Great analogy.
I'll give you an real example. Okay, so I got promoted from rep to first line manager when I worked at a company called HP, Hewlett Packard. They put me into a cubicle, and this is before the internet. So people basically had file cabinets full of paper. They had, especially the cubicle that I got was from the former manager that wasn't performing, and had loose leaf binders, right, full of paper. And then you also had, at the time, an inbox and an outbox that was physical, like people would take all the paper they wanted to send you and put it in the inbox, and then you would filter through it and decide what was important and respond and put it in the outbox. Your assistant would take it and get it through inter-office mail. So think of it as like paper email, right, for people that are a lot younger than us. So
we just lost half our demographic, bro.
No one explained to me what was important, right? So I go in the office and there's all these file cabinets I open. It's full of paper. It's loose leaf binders stacked in bookshelves, right? And the inbox is full. So I go downstairs to shipping, and I used to play softball with the guys. So I said to this guy, John Wagner, John, grab your guys and grab some hand trucks. Come on up to my office. They come up and I say, all the files and all the loose leaf notebooks, everything in this office, all the paper, take it and throw it in the bins outside. Took them like 4 trips to get it all out. Then every day I put my trash can right next to my in-out box. And when I make sales calls all day, I came home, I took everything in the inbox and threw it in the trash can. Never looked at it, never. Then people started coming to me when I would come back from sales calls with my guys, and they'd start asking me questions like, hey, how come you didn't respond to this thing? I sent it to you 3 times. Okay, now it's my turn to understand what's important. Tell me why it's important. Why do I have to do it? Why do I have to do it now? And if you can't answer those questions, it's not that important. Then I would continue to throw it in the trash can, because my compensation plan said when my sales guys sell, they get paid and I get paid. That's all it said. So that was the biggest rock for me. Everything else was a little rock, and you had to explain to me, and I figured out pretty quickly that probably 90% of the stuff I got was not important and it was not urgent. 10% was important and it was urgent, and I paid attention to that. So I filtered out my inbox pretty quickly after that, and I was, top performing leader, first line. But that's how I figured it out.
I like that. I'm thinking about these lessons from athletics and we used to have this saying, it said that the eye in the sky doesn't lie. And so we got filmed on everything we did. We got filmed on practice. We got filmed. Obviously, they filmed the games. But the new one for me, which we didn't do in high school, was filming in practice. And so there's a direct correlation to what somebody was teaching somebody and the drills that you were doing that should show up in game-like situations. And if they didn't, they would either address how you were doing the drill or they get rid of the drill and they get a new drill. So I remember, John, when I first became a first-line manager, I got lucky because I started asking people, and I was at Xerox, and I started asking people, what do you love about what we're asking you to do in this job? What do you love about what we're asking you to do? And what do you not like about what we're asking you to do? And I found, like, a lot of people are like, oh, you can't ask that because they're going to talk about, forecasting. I wanted an honest answer. And I typically found what they didn't like about what I was asking them to do was directly correlated to they didn't see a connection between what I was asking them to do and success. Now, sometimes I had to reconnect them emotionally to they just didn't see the connection. There's definitely a connection. But many times I found going into new organizations that, okay, if I can't figure out how that's leading to the ultimate success, we'll get rid of it. And I think that I think that's some great advice. I don't think people are actually willing to do that. Why are we doing that? Because that's the way we've always done it. So I think those are good ones. Tony, do you have any, like, you're in these with these big these leaders that have these big responsibilities and many processes? How does that relate to your situation?
Yeah, look, I empathize because some of these jobs are right. They're huge and, it's hard to sort of narrow down what they're actually going to be responsible for. The truth is they got to be responsible for all of it. But, at the same time, they do have to get organized better around, getting to execution and actually getting things done. And I think that's the biggest thing is, great leaders, great performers, they find a way with all the noise, they still find a way to get things done. And I think that's a big differentiator, right? People who, get shit done, are the people who actually do the best probably in just about everything. But yeah, it's hard. You've got, all this noise coming at you, but still, the best performers find a way to cut through it and deliver what they need to deliver.
The other thing, Cap, and you know this well, is, we live in corporations, we live in 90-day increments. And in 90 days, you have to build out, what you call an operating rhythm. Now, an operating rhythm starts with your boss, right? And what does the boss need from you, every week or every day or every month throughout the 90 days? And you list that down. Okay, if the boss needs that and I have to give it to him or her, I have to be prepared a couple days before to be able to do that. If I need some information from my people to do that exercise, I have to start with them first, get the information, aggregate it, make some decisions, and decide what I'm going to give to the boss, right? So, and you can outline that throughout the 90-day period of a quarter and figure out and your role does change, in those 90 days, depending upon whether or not what you're doing in your exercise. So maybe in the beginning of a quarter, you're training all your people, and doing forecast reviews and getting ready for the quarter. The last 2 weeks of the quarter as a salesperson, or a sales leader, you're usually locked down and you're just trying to close deals. So there's different times throughout the quarter where you have to figure out, what is it that I'm really supposed to do? What do I need to prepare to deliver to people? And, what do I need from my people? So,
John, that's just such a great point. That's such a great point. Having, for leaders, a predictable management routines and, having those routines with, the same cadence and discipline is really important. I always ask them, I say, take me through your management routines. How do you make sure that, you're bringing your team together? How do you make sure you're concentrating on the right things? And, there's always modifications that can be done there. Our boss is very good at it. He has incredibly disciplined management routines. We start every Monday morning with, a 4-hour meeting. We go through the financials. We go through, the sort of hot items. And then he never leaves the room without allowing everybody at the table to share what might be the 1 or 2 big items that they, are working on. And, that sort of level of inclusiveness too is a key for leaders. There's always in the room the 2 people that always want to talk and share, but a great leader makes sure we don't leave the meeting until we hear from everybody.
Love that.
around the table.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing too is when if you share your 90-day operating rhythm with the people around you and the other executives and peers on your team, then they understand why you may not be getting back to them. For instance, as a sales leader, if you're closing deals the last 2 weeks of the quarter, certainly I'm not going to respond to your marketing survey, right? That's not important to me right now. I'll get to it, but I'll get to it at the beginning of the quarter. And when you share that with not only your people, but people above you and your peers, it's really effective in how they interface with you also, and making sure that you're all productive.
And you'll find that for me, I love this conversation because it's part of the human condition. Everybody loves to be led, everybody, provided you can take them to a place they can't get to on their own. And so what I found is that even at no matter what level you're at, when you have an operating rhythm and you are allowing others to draft into your operating rhythm, because most people struggle with doing that, they're going to wind up drafting into yours. Because provided it gets them to a place they couldn't get to on their own, they're not going to argue about what the rhythm was. They're going to focus on the results. So I think I love this conversation so far. But Tony, one of the things I want to do, I love your concept. We talked about this. Let's get into some specifics around what you call these categories for 5-tool players. So now we're talking about leaders kind of assessing talent. And you talked to me the other day about this category for 5-tool players. What is it? What does it stand for, and how's it transferred into business?
Yeah, I wonder how many people listening today know what a 5-tool player is. I have to confess, it's a baseball term that I wasn't familiar with, but our CEO, he loves sports. He knows everything about baseball. And, him and I have been having a conversation about leaders and leadership for 10 years. And, at one point he said, we've been trying to codify, what are the traits that, the best leaders certainly bring to the table. And, one day he said, I got it. And I said, what's that? He said, the greatest leaders, they're well-rounded like 5-tool players. And, for our audience, 5-tool players are those wonderful baseball players that hit for power, hit for average, steal bases, have a great, fielding, Golden Glove, and I think I got them all right.
They can throw.
They can throw. So you think about who's the best 5-tool player today. What do you guys think? Who comes to mind?
Well, today,
Yeah, today. What do you think?
well,
Tommy, right?
Tony has to be up there. Yeah, he's got to be up there.
But I think there's other names that we probably remember, right? Mays and, Mantle and Griffey Jr. and Aaron. So, I've kind of been, reading up on 5-tool players a lot. So he said, that's what we need to think about is well-rounded leaders. So we came up with our own 6 areas that, sticking on this theme of corporate athlete, that you really need to be well developed to be successful. So borrowing from 5-tool, 6 areas, I'll rattle it real quick. These are all areas that they're the basics. They're the fundamentals, great companies. It's not any magic. It's just usually they do the basics best. Trait number 1, financial and business acumen, right? If you're a sales leader, you know your sales plan, all of the customers that make up your revenue, who your targets are, what your goals are for the week, the month, the year. So financial and business acumen, very important. Second is client focus. And John, that's your world, right? You build a company, based on, the absolute need and desire for companies to deliver, what their companies value. And, we could talk more about that. People and team leadership, we talked about it. To be right for your team, you got to be right, for yourself, and being a great, people and team leader. In our world, in the financial services realm, something we call pristine risk and controls, right? Making sure that cyber is taken care of, and, making sure that, all the technology is working properly is important. Operational excellence, we as leaders get paid to make things better, not just to sort of maintain the farm. And, coming to the workplace every day with a mindset of continuous improvement is important. And then finally, in the world that we live in today, innovation and technology, where AI and, so many other technologies are sort of at the forefront of creating, more digital and integrated world. So, after, thinking about leaders, and, our CEO, Frank Bisignano, he worked for Sandy Weil, he worked for Jamie Dimon. So he had, pretty good reference of leaders. I've had a pretty good reference of leaders in my career. We've sort of come to the conclusion that leaders need to be like five-tool players. They need to be well-rounded leaders, and not sort of over-indexed in one or the other, but, really developed in all six of those areas. And, that's love you guys' thoughts on that. Is there anything you find that's missing? Anything that you'd ask, is it, or should it be included? But that's kind of where we're at now on our framework for leadership.
I like it. Johnny, what are your thoughts on those?
Well, I was going to ask Tony where recruiting fits into that. Those
people and team leadership. Yeah, people and team leadership.
I think that's big. Your ability to recruit, especially as a growing company, your ability to recruit, A players, and then as a leader, your ability to then develop them so they don't need you, and you can promote them to the next level. A sign of a great leader isn't when they leave and then the business collapses. A sign of a great leader is when they left and there's a whole bunch of people underneath them that could take their spot, and they're constantly promoting people off their team, while they're there. That's a sign of an amazing leader. They've not only recruited great, but they've trained and developed those people to become the next great leaders.
I think
that to me is the ultimate, or the two ultimate ones that
and I think it's as old as dirt, because Tony, I know you worked with Larry Bossidy, and I remember being young back in the day, or younger, and reading his book. Yeah, reading his book. I think it was called On Execution or something like that. And Execution. And so I'm getting ready to read this book because I think I need financial acumen. I need all this, stuff that I need to, look at more data, and I need to be more business oriented. And basically what the book taught me was it's all about people. All those things are important. Everything that we're talking about is important. But when you get the people one wrong, and you're not spending as much time recruiting and optimizing your talent, that was a huge eye-opener for me. And I think it's really, really true. So when I look at this list, I'm like, man, the people and team leadership is like, when I talk to people, like, I think people underestimate that one. And I also think that people underestimate financial management, business acumen, and also metrics around key business indicators for running a business. Those are two that I see leaders coming up today I don't say they're not prepared, but there's some area of opportunity to get better at, for sure. What about the 15 people that you're working with? I know they're the up and comers, and where are you seeing areas of opportunity?
Yeah, they all have opportunity. Look, we all do. It's sort of like, the aspiration that, you never really get there, but we all could every day improve in every one of these areas. But I think through a 360, which I usually recommend, that, you get feedback from, the direct reports, from the boss, from their peers. You can get a sense of, okay, well, what do people say that I'm really good at? What do people say that I could do better at? So I think a 360 helps, a little bit of psychometrics, because I think some of this is a little bit about, our personality and what sort of our natural inclination might be. So, providing that feedback, kind of looking at that data, and then, working on a plan that says, okay, look, in 2 or 3 of these areas, I need to get better. If I aspire, to be in, your job, Tony, or your job, John, I need to, work on this. And what I find is, these leaders are incredibly receptive. I think most people want to get better. Most people want help. And, I'm having kind of the time of my life now, being able to spend quality time as an executive coach helping. Whereas, as a CHRO, which I, was for 20 years for several public companies, the interactions you have with people are more transactional. Yeah, there's development involved, and certainly leadership development has always been something I've enjoyed and gotten involved with. But I do think, it's more transactional when you're in sort of the heat of the battle. If you're sort of giving people advice on in the minute what they need to do, versus executive coaching is more about how do they think about, longer term, their goals and aspirations, and do they have the talent? And if they don't, what do they need to do to get back, into the gym to work on it?
Yeah. The one last point I'd like to make on this is, like, under operational excellence, you have this philosophy, or Kaizen. And I think you were telling me that's like one of your favorite Japanese words, like self-improvement. I find there's a direct correlation to people's willingness and craving for feedback to their success in life. Is that people that they either are looking for feedback, can take feedback, can process feedback, or they are looking to avoid being in a situation where they're getting feedback. And I find that's like a big character trait for me for success today. Is it's just a normal operating part of their business. Is they get feedback. Not only do they get feedback, but they can do something with it. They can comprehend it. They can understand where it's coming from and why it's coming from, and they can change, or they can improve, or they can be argumentative about it.
Yeah, your point is so well made that, why I love that word is, humans have this sense of, they want to be right, and then defensiveness starts to peek in. And Kaizen really says that, look, there's no need to be defensive, because every one of us can get better every day at everything. So, in that context, there is no room for defensiveness, because it's just a life condition that says every day I can learn something, every day I can get better, every day I could, teach and learn. And that's what I love about it. It puts the defensiveness right on its rear, where it should be. And when people kind of start going down that, defensive or justifying path, I immediately redirect them and say, look, we could spend our time thinking about how we can improve and get better, or we could rehash all the reasons why, things are the way they are. And usually they get the message.
Yeah, usually when they get to that point, Tony, where they're not coachable and they're not adapting to the changes in the environment around them, that's when you know that you've they've lost themselves, or they're just done. They don't want to be coached anymore. They don't want to change and adapt. And that's when, that's probably the level that they're going to attain. And that's it.
I like that. On the coachability. Yeah. Sorry, Tony, go ahead.
But there's coachability and then there's adaptability. Like, I to coach you as much as you want, Cap. But
Processing the feedback.
See you actually on the field and trying to make those incremental changes to adapt and finally get to that next level, or gain that skill, then, it's great that I could coach you and you're open to it, but you're the person that has to look in the mirror and adapt. And that's where a lot of people fall down. They don't want to actually change.
After 40 years, I'm going to throw this out to you guys. I have something I call the 5 archetypes. And, when I go into any organization, I'm now almost instinctively able to sort of, as you have discussions with people and you kind of talk about, what's going on, people typically fall in these 5 archetypes. Let me give them to you. New faces, right? We all have new faces, right? People that we recruited to be on our sales team. They're new, they generally have a lot of enthusiasm, right? They want to do the right thing. They're excited because they've just joined the company. Change embracers. These are the people that we love in life, right? They just say, hey, coach, what do you need me to do? No matter what position, no matter what you need from me, I'm willing to do it. Life would be great, right? If we had all change embracers. Then we start to get into what I call keepers of the heritage. People that are nostalgic and they remember the good days. John Kaplan, when I was at BG in 1980, we won the championship and that was the best team. And, hey, it's great to be nostalgic, but I tell people you can't live in the past, right? So keepers of the heritage, we got to bring them forward. Then I'd say there are those that are under siege. These are people that they just want to be left alone. They're like, look, I have an accounting spreadsheet that I have to get done in the next 30 minutes. Don't bother me. They're just sort of heads down. Their problem is they get so below the water line that they can drown if they're not careful. And then the last is what I call true resistors. And true resistors usually are mostly passive aggressive. Typically they're not outright resisting, although maybe they are, but usually it's more passive aggressive. They kind of learn to say yes, but they mean no, and that kind of stuff. And you got to get, as a leader, you've got to get, that sort of profile of your team sort of in a position where you're working with those that you can say, but you're moving on from the true resistors, because if not, it'll take you down for sure. And we see it, right? Every organization usually has a couple of these, right, guys? Sadly, managers let it go on, realizing they're sort of undoing all of the good work that's going on around them because they're allowing, 1 or 2 people to sort of bring that vibe.
Huge.
It becomes really difficult to have standards of performance for your team if you have these resistors on your team, where that can only go on so long. Let's say you have just 5 people on your team and you have one resistor that's never doing or meeting the standards of performance. The longer you let it go on, the more the 4 performers are, outside, going to the bar, the restaurants, the softball field, wherever they go, talking about you, saying, why is it that the leader doesn't see what we see in this non-performer? And why do they have standards of performance for us, but not for this other person? That can only go on so long before you lose your reputation as a leader. You have to take care of that, to Tony's point.
I love that. Johnny, you talk about a version of this, like when you go into new organizations, there's like 3 different types of people. There's people that are never going to change. Remind me how you do that.
Well, when I've gone into organizations where, you just get plopped in as the brand new leader, right? And no one knows who you are or anything. You're going to have, and you are coming in as the change agent. Everybody knows it. There's basically 3 groups of people. And Tony pointed some of them out. There's the people that no matter what you say, they're dying for new leadership, and they're gonna jump on that bandwagon because they're looking to get better, and they can't wait for new leadership, and they don't like the way the old team was, and that they're glad a change agent is coming in. Then there's a group way on the other side that they're the resistors. No matter what you say or what you do, you could turn water into wine right in front of them, and they still don't care. They're not changing, And then there's a big group. The biggest group is in the middle. They're like, well, what's going on and what's going to happen here? And which way should I move? Which way's the wind blowing? And you have to use that that first group to get some really quick wins, to get the middle group to move over to the winning group, right? And you have to get, because the naysayers, the resistant group, guess what they're doing? They're sitting around naysaying all the time. And guess who they're trying to poison? They're not poisoning the people that want your new leadership. They're poisoning the people in the middle that don't know which way this wind's blowing. So the longer it takes you to go get some new wins and advertise those wins in front of everybody, you're getting into some risky territory. The naysayers are going to try to poison you and poison the middle group.
I love that.
Yeah, and I'll give you guys a real timeline. I mean, when go back to 2006, KKR did the first data. LBO was the 5th largest LBO of all time, and some of you may remember the movie Keep Barbarians of the Gate. Sort of a similar big LBO. First data at the time, had become, sorry, John, the Xerox. Not in a good way, but in a bad way. It's sort of at the end of the life cycle of product, or the Kodak, whatever example. 2006 to 13, 5 CEOs, they all failed. My boss, Frank Bisignano, hired in 2013, came from JP Morgan, always wanted to be a CEO, like some of the underlying assets, had a lot of conviction, is a great sort of operational leader, Mr. Fix-It, and sort of decided to take it on 2013. Fast forward to 15, one of the largest IPOs, 2019, a merger. And, today we sit at, 130 billion in market cap. When that journey started with me 10 years ago, we were 3 or 4. So it's one of the best turnaround stories of all time. But if we think of talent, to go full circle here, we were at Columbia, the MBA grads. Frank and I were there, and one of the MBA students says, how did you guys succeed when 5 other CEOs failed? And the truth of the matter is, Frank said, look, it wasn't something that I could fix. I had to redo it. Right. So I moved, 100% just about, of the top 200 out, and I replaced them with, 200 leaders that I knew could get the job done. Because look, 5 CEOs tried to fix it, and what happened to them? Right. So repeating that again wasn't going to be good for anybody. And I think, that's when a leader takes over a new team. They've got to make the assessment. Do I have something that's fundamentally broken? Or am I going into a situation that's quite good? Look, if you go into a situation quite good, the worst thing you could do is destabilize it, right? So you've got to make that judgment as a leader when you take over a new team. Where am I, on that? Is it working well? Is it a few modifications, but don't destabilize it? Or do I have to completely remake it? And I think, Frank succeeded and we succeeded because fundamentally we knew we had to remake it.
I'd be remiss here if I didn't talk about one of the things I love about you, Tony. And when I first met you at Fiserv, First Data, is that you understood the critical aspects of sales effectiveness. And so all of your journey, so this would be a good way for us to kind of wrap here, is like, would you mind kind of just talking about some of the things that you saw? And I loved, it's very rare for me where I have a EVP of HR that becomes the economic buyer for what I do for a living. And I loved it. I loved meeting you. I loved your perspective. You were so close to the concept of sales. Give us some thoughts on what you've seen in that Fiserv, that $130 billion market cap. Some of the things that you saw were critical components for effectiveness going forward.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, John, for those kind words. It's been a great partnership working with you and the team. And I think we knew that one of those business processes that if we were going to succeed needed to be fixed it was the sales process. And when we got here, we basically had, 5 or 6, let's call them loosely, divisions. They all had their own fiefdoms. They all had their own silos, and they were all selling products, to a similar customer or client. And you might find that you had 4 salespeople from First Data all in the waiting room of that client's office, selling products and not talking to one another. And, we knew that, that is not the way clients want to operate. It's not the way that, companies should operate, but, that's the way a lot of companies operate today. So we knew we needed to change that. We wanted to change it. We wanted to create one company where, our client was at the center of everything that we do. And, to do that, we needed to reinvent the sales process. You helped us sort of reframe it from, what is the latest gizmo that you have to sell, to really understanding the client needs, really building true, trustful, and lasting relationships with the clients. Because when things go bump in the night, when they always do, you've got to be able to fall back on that trusting relationship and, developing, what products the customer wants and needs, to, solve their biggest pain points. So, I give a lot of credit to you and Chris Fosquet, who's our Chief Revenue Officer, been with me the whole entire journey. Joe Profeta, who is our sales leader that we brought in from, very similar background to yours. And I think it's one of the real success stories, and why we've been able to make that turn is, in essence, we sell every year the equivalent of, let's say, double-digit revenue growth on 20 billion. We create a Fortune 500 company every year in new sales. So, it's real. I think it's one of the best things that you can do if you're a sales leader listening today. Do I really have a great sales process? From, product development all the way through to service. Does that work the way it should? And a commercial for you, John, is if they don't, they should call you, because that's something.
I want to switch the commercial a little bit. I want to switch. Thank you for that. It was a great journey, but I'm looking in the camera, right? I'm looking at Zoom. I'm looking at the screen, and I'm seeing 2 executives that understood that sales is not a division, that sales is a company initiative, and that everybody in the company owns it. And that if you really want to have transformation, you have to have the entire company behind an effort. And both of you, Johnny, what Tony talked about was a similar conversation that you and I had back at BMC, when you had all those reps doing, a zillion different things. And I turned the table back to you for leadership that says, the best leaders I've ever seen are the ones that they get the entire company aligned behind the sales function. And hats off to both of you. You guys have had great success.
McMahon, you're the expert. What did I miss? What might you have picked up on? Love to hear your perspective.
No. I mean, for me, the number one metric at a company should be sales productivity, because when sales productivity goes up, everything on the financial statement is going to look pretty damn good. And when sales productivity drops, you're going to have a really bad board meeting, Everything on a financial statement is going to be affected. So I think not enough companies understand the giant effect that sales productivity is as a metric for the rest of the company.
Yeah. So I'm a little commercial for anybody out there, that I don't care if it's Force Management or any company that you're looking at from sales effectiveness. If you want to figure out a way to get the entire company, so you just didn't do it. You did it at First Data first, and then the next big thing was Fiserv was the largest, financial services merger in the history of the world, and you took the same approach there. And I think the results kind of speak for themselves. So you guys both have been great leaders in that transformation Tony, you're amazing. There were so many topics and Johnny's always telling me, he gives me the feedback and I got to get adaptable. He says, some of these topics, John, that you bring to the table, we could spend an hour, we could dig deeper.
Right.
And we're going to have you back, Tony. There's some golden nuggets here around people and execution. And if you'd be willing, we'd love to have you back. I'm anxious to see. I'm excited for you. What's going to happen on the executive coaching front? I think you're going to be one of the leaders in the world on executive coaching. So thanks for coming, buddy. We hope to get you back.
Yeah, I'd love to, guys. Really enjoyed it. And, John, we'll have to we'll get together and reminisce a little bit as keepers of the heritage about our time at OU and Bowling Green. We know a lot of people in common, and love to catch up with you. I know, by the way, we're both doing a lot with our as alums with our universities, and I think that's fabulous as well. So.
Yeah, well, your work led to a championship. My work led to second place, but I'm already working on next year, buddy. So you better get going.
I love it, man. I love it. All right, guys. John, good seeing you as well.
Yeah, good seeing you, Tony. Thanks for doing this. And thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Revenue Builders Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to check us out at forcemanagement.com.